Frank Gaffney. Frank is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy. And there is an event coming up in Chicago that we're going to get to in just a couple of minutes, and we'll tell you more about that. And Frank's going to be one of the speakers at that. But first of all, good morning and good to see you.
Good morning. It's great to have you here. Welcome to Washington.
I think I spoke to you first when I lived in the Pittsburgh area. So you've been at this for a little while, but for those unfamiliar with the center, explain what you do.
The center is an organization that has indeed been at it for a little while. We've been there in business trying to promote what President Reagan used to call peace through strength since 1988. So it's 24 years now. We've been doing it through a variety of ways that I think are not really typical of so-called think tanks. It's a very activist organization. We work trying to advance issues with usually coalitions of people who can get things done, and that's part of what's prompting this conference, as a matter of fact.
Well, we're going to talk about the conference here in just a moment, but I'd like to come back to a story that in the last couple of weeks has been making news about the amount of the nuclear arsenal that the U.S. has and the reduction of up to 80% of that. Give me your take as to why that's either a smart move or maybe not so smart.
Well, there are 2 points that I think are important to make about it. One is that at a moment when the rest of the world is actually building up nuclear weapons, not going out of business in that area, this is a bizarre and I think reckless thing to be doing. Secondly, we're being told that the kinds of cuts that the president is making more generally in our defense capabilities are a product of really nothing more than fiscal discipline and trying to, shrink the size of the deficit. What I think is going on, as evidenced in the nuclear arms reductions that he's contemplating, is evidence of truly a radical disarmament agenda of this president. And the fact that it's so obvious in the nuclear area should help us have a better appreciation for how really, I think, perilous are the kinds of cuts that he's proposing to make in all of our other capabilities as well.
Wouldn't the president, though, say, if we're going to be a world leader in trying to promote peace, shouldn't we be among the first to send the signal that we're peaceful people and therefore that we're not arming ourselves? And in fact, we would like the rest of the world to cooperate. I mean, we've been at disarmament for a while.
I'm sure he not only would say that, he has said that, Mark. The trouble is that it just doesn't have any historical basis. We can disarm till the cows come home, as they say. And if others are not of a similar mind, it simply makes the world a vastly more dangerous place. I worked under President Ronald Reagan in the nuclear forces arena, and I think there was nobody who was more committed to the elimination of nuclear weapons than Ronald Reagan. But he understood that it couldn't possibly happen under circumstances where we would, in fact, not only be putting our people at greater risk, but we would probably be actually inspiring the opposite of what we have in mind. See, what's been true for decades, of course, is that we've had a deterrent that not only has protected ourselves, but also friends and allies around the world. It's extended deterrence is the technical term for it. The nuclear umbrella is a more popular way of contemplating it.
Mm-hmm.
If we fold up that umbrella or simply pitch it out, other nations are not going to allow themselves to be disarmed or left vulnerable. And you will see, I'm afraid, a wild proliferation of nuclear capabilities, nuclear weapons, in a lot of places where we just as soon not have that kind of thing happen. That's especially true at a moment when, as I say, you have not only the Iranians beavering away at nuclear capabilities, you have the Chinese massively building up their forces. Did you know there's a 3,000-mile complex of tunnels? They call it the Underground Great Wall of China, which is now being used to conceal their nuclear deterrent. And there's reason to believe, as a study out of Georgetown University suggests, that they may have orders of magnitude more nuclear weapons than the roughly 200 to 300 that we have attributed to them. You got the Russians, who have just announced in the pace of the past 2 weeks under Vladimir Putin, who was just reelected, that they're going to build 400 more nuclear-capable missiles in the next few years. You have even the French, the Brits, and others that are not considered to be so threatening to us, building up nuclear weapons. In short, this is foolishness. Yeah. And I believe it is the triumph of hope over experience, Samuel Johnson once said about second marriages, and it's a very dubious basis for national security policy.
If you're just joining us, Frank Gaffney in studio here at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., where I'll be broadcasting from these next 3 days, and he is founder and president of an organization known as the Center for Security Policy. How many countries have nuclear weapons?
Well, we are not entirely sure. We count Israel as one of those that does. I think that makes it about 8 or 9. Mm-hmm. But the trouble is that there are a number of countries, including several that I just alluded to, that are friends of ours. Mm-hmm. Say the Japanese, for example, the South Koreans, the Taiwanese, the Germans, who are not nuclear weapon states at the moment, but could become nuclear capable if they chose to in very short order. I think the Japanese have said it might take a couple of days to move them from what they currently have to what they could have if they chose to.
Should we be advocates of those countries that are allies of ours to actually increase their nuclear arsenal?
Well, I personally would prefer to have what has worked for the past 60 or so years, namely our extended deterrence, serve as a basis for their security. But I guarantee you that if we, as I say, recklessly eliminate or simply make incredible our nuclear deterrent, we invite our friends, to say nothing of our enemies, to expand their nuclear ambitions and capabilities. And I think that just makes the world a more dangerous place. I don't know why we would do that.
All right. So, Frank, despite the fact the president may want to head this direction, doesn't Congress have a lot to say about this?
You'd think so, and ultimately they should, because it will be up to them to fund certain activities that would go into this. But here's the problem, and it's in many ways the most important secret in Washington today. We have allowed our nuclear forces, which are shrinking in number under these various agreements and decisions that have been taken over the years, to atrophy. We have not been modernizing them. We have not been maintaining them in as safe and as reliable and as effective a manner as we know how to do. That's happened under presidents of both parties, to be honest with you, and Congress has gone along with it. And to some extent, I fear that even if the president can't execute this radical disarmament agenda that he's set for himself, the simple perpetuation of that atrophying condition of our arsenal will effectively take it down, make it incredible if, again, something doesn't get done positively to remedy it, modernizing most especially the forces. I'd like to see them tested underground, as we used to do, to ensure that they do work. But these are the sorts of things that are not in prospect at the moment unless there's a public demand for it, and that hasn't happened yet.
Frank Gaffney, founder and president of the Center for Security Policy here in Washington. Let's just spend a couple of minutes on what the discussions that are going on. We just heard about that in the news. Big topic today internationally about what to do with the nuclear arsenal in Iran, and especially for the U.S. Isn't Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with the president today?
Yes, he is. The Israeli prime minister is in town. He is going to be addressing not only the president, but a large group of Americans who are very concerned about Israel, known as the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And perhaps after the White House will get a sense from him in the remarks at AIPAC as to his current thinking. But I think it's pretty clear that the Israelis have come to the point where they believe Iran is perilously close to the point of no return on acquiring nuclear weapons. As we were talking about before the break, it's one of the threats that we face, but it is truly an existential threat to Israel. And as a result, I think there's now a growing consensus within Israel that the time to allow sanctions to work, as we endlessly are encouraged to do, is at an end. And it will be very interesting to see whether President Obama is able, through one means or another, to dissuade the Israelis from taking military action on their own. something that I think they believe will have to be done.
Well, Frank, aren't there some who might ask, well, wait a second, who has the right to determine whether another country has nuclear weapons? I mean, we just talked a moment ago about places like Japan that could develop them rather quickly if need be. But wait a second, who has to give permission in the international community for this to happen?
It's not a question of permission, of course, Mark. It's a question of whether possession of nuclear weapons by the Iranians will result in what it has basically throughout history, with the notable exception of the 2 bombs that we dropped to end World War II, namely as a means of creating and preserving a kind of standoff between those nations. In this case, again, as I said before the break, based not on what we speculate, but what the Iranians have themselves indicated, they intend to use these weapons. And that's what puts the Israelis in a position not of saying, well, we don't think that's a good idea, but saying that's an intolerable prospect. And I think understandably so.
What is the likelihood that there is going to be some strong military action by either the United States or Israel towards Iran as a result of this?
I think if something else is not done that brings about an end to this nuclear quest by the Iranians, perhaps, the overthrow of the regime, which would seem to me to be the most likely way of effecting that kind of change, that it's a very high probability. I don't know that it's 100%, but I think it's pretty high.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's quickly here talk about what's coming up in Chicago, because you're a part of this event. It's called Faith Under Fire. Give us some details on this.
Well, part of what makes this whole business of nuclear threats like the Iranian threat and the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in places like Egypt and elsewhere so worrying is what these guys have in common is a commitment to something they call Sharia. Sharia being a doctrine. It's often said Sharia law, but it's really a comprehensive totalitarian ideology, if you will, that is supremacist in character and is designed to rule the entire world. Where it is applied, it is especially unfriendly, shall we say, hostile, indeed barbarically repressive to other minority faiths. And that's what we're going to be addressing in the course of this conference is, as Sharia and its adherents become ascendant in key parts of the world, and as they, by the way, try to bring this doctrine here to the United States as well, what does it mean to freedom, specifically freedom of religion, but also, for that matter, other important constitutionally guaranteed rights and liberties here, like freedom of speech.
When's the conference coming up?
It will be taking place on the 10th of March. It runs from about 9:15 in the morning until 4:30 in the
this week.
afternoon.
Yeah.
It is this Saturday. It is going to be at the Crystal Palace Ballroom in Mount Prospect.
And this is open to the public?
It is indeed. We invite them to attend. It's a very interesting group of members of Congress and leaders in various faith communities, people who are deeply knowledgeable about this threat to freedom, and we encourage people to attend.
And Congressman Roscom, I know, is going to be a part of that.
Congressman Roscom will be a keynoter, as will Congressman Joe Walsh.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, again, for people who want to join this effort and to hear more about it, how do they sign up for this, or do they have to? Can they just show up?
Well, it's preferable if they would register, and the way to do that is faithunderfireconference.org.
Well, that's pretty simple.
It's very easy.
All right, Faith Under Fire Conference, like one word, .org. We will post a link to that at our website today. Just a heads up on that as you listen this morning. And perhaps you'll want to get a few friends and head out and get some very interesting information about things that may likely affect the future of our country. So,
indeed.
Frank, thanks so much for coming by today.
The pleasure's mine, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
Frank Gaffney, founder and president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C. And don't forget about, again, the website faithunderfireconference.org.